How does Darkest Dungeon depict the horrors of fighting against Lovecraftian monsters so well? While its simple and linear plot does not offer much to keep the player engaged, the game does boast a striking art style, evocative soundtrack, and haunting voice acting, all of which help create a hellish tone. It also doesn't hurt that the game's genre is a brutal mix of RPGs and roguelikes where you recruit, customize, mold, dispose of, and even kill your minions. So, if you even choose to care about the mercenaries, you will really struggle to keep the characters alive and in working condition while listening to the narrator's booming taunts and watching deranged mercenaries express their agony through one-liners the developers call barks. All of this, of course, is wrapped up in an expressive and grim art style. Now, these all help the depictions of the horrors, but what makes Darkest Dungeon so special is that it tells two stories. The first story is simple and quite uninteresting on its own, and is delivered through the plot revealed by the narrator talking.
I had collected many rare and elusive volumes on ancient herbal properties, and was set to enjoy several weeks immersed in comfortable study. My work was interrupted, however, by a singularly striking young woman who insisted on repeated calls to the house.
The second story, though, is about you. It's about the player, and it is told through an innovative game mechanic that doesn't just make the game harder, but affects and changes every aspect of it: the Affliction System. Hi, I'm Orash, and this is Game Narrative 101. Let's talk about how the Affliction System alters the narrative of Darkest Dungeon. In a 2015 Gamasutra article, Chris Bourassa and Tyler Sigmund, the duo responsible for Darkest Dungeon, comment on the origin of the Affliction System as follows. Although we are obviously influenced by Lovecraft in terms of tone, we never really thought of things in the strict insanity filter that many Call of Cthulhu games adopt. In fact, the inspiration for the Affliction System itself was not Lovecraft, but rather the role of human factors in history and fiction. War games have often incorporated human factors like morale, and many movies have illustrated them to great effect, like Aliens and The Thing. We wanted to capture the human response to stress. Any person can break under pressure, and people break in different ways. Through the Affliction System, Darkest Dungeon addresses the mental and emotional health of the mercenaries, much like health points address their physical health. Mercenaries accumulate stress as they traverse the dungeons and face the terrible foes within. If their stress levels cross a certain threshold, they are afflicted with potentially fatal mental conditions including paranoia, hopelessness, sadism, masochism, and so on. Further stress might even outright kill them. Mercenaries under the effects of these conditions might act according to their affliction instead of the player's will, sometimes even harming their companions in different ways. This results in a domino effect made of stress and maladies of the mind. There is a small chance that the stresses of battle might harden your mercenary, but that is the exception and not the rule. Now, even if a mercenary was at death's door in a dungeon, their physical wounds heal instantly after returning from that dungeon to the hamlet. Afflictions, on the other hand, leave lingering psychological wounds that can only be healed either by resting within the dungeon or, and this is far more common, back in the hamlet by spending significant amounts of resources like gold and time. Even then, these so-called cures are dangerous in their own right. Harsh remedies such as drinking, gambling, self-flagellation, and so on have a chance of traumatizing the mercenary or making an addict out of them, all with negative gameplay consequences. In short, it is nigh impossible to take good care of your mercenaries. This is where the mechanics come in and save the storytelling of the game. Without showing options and making the player choose, the Affliction System offers two ways to play Darkest Dungeon. I call them the expeditious and the empathetic routes. Players who take the expeditious route consider the mercenaries expendable and aim only to reach and clear the last dungeon as fast as possible. Those who take the empathetic route, on the other hand, prioritize protecting the physical and mental well-being of the mercenaries. The plot of Darkest Dungeon does not change however you choose to play it, but as the game progresses, the narrative experience of the player changes drastically. It is important to note that more often than not, how you approach the game falls somewhere on a spectrum between these two extreme routes. but the fact remains that Darkest Dungeon requires you to make a moral choice as whether to dehumanize the mercenaries and have an easier time finishing the game, or to humanize them and make progress much more difficult than it already is. The moral implications of Darkest Dungeon arise from the moral questions the Affliction System poses to players. The game encourages players to ignore the stress levels of adventurers and the states of their mental health. The player can take advantage of the superior treasures found by mercenaries fighting in the dark, ignore the higher levels of stress it causes the adventurers, and avoid spending their acquired gold to heal afflicted characters. Players who choose to do so can simply dismiss afflicted characters upon their return to the hamlet and replace them with new mercenaries who will probably eventually suffer the same fate. The accumulated gold gained by an expeditious player can then be used on one favored group of elite mercenaries to optimize their performance and ensure that they can survive the ferocity of the final battle. The expeditious route makes progress faster and easier since, in the end, players can take only 4 adventurers to the final battle anyway. However, this tactic has significant moral implications. Choosing to ignore adventurers' afflictions dehumanizes them and can cause players to feel more distanced from characters they control. Alternately, players who take the empathetic route are eventually forced by the game to make some immoral decisions or just quit the game. The player may attempt to keep every mercenary completely healthy, but at some point the cost will be impossible to cover. However, even though it is impossible to finish Darkest Dungeon without overlooking some mercenaries' plights, the player can still make a moral statement and refuse to willingly give in to the tyrannical mistreatment of their employees. How much is that worth if the eventual result is death and misery? You be the judge. Well, maybe you and one of the leading experts on the effects of power on people, Pulitzer Prize winner journalist Robert Caro. When summarizing his lifelong research in an interview with the New York Times, he comments on the cliche that power corrupts, saying, "I've learned that power does not always corrupt. Power can cleanse. When you're climbing to get power, you have to use whatever methods are necessary. But when you get power, you can do what you want, so power reveals." So to answer the previous question, the decision to take the empathetic or expeditious route is important. It does matter. Not because of an end result that confirms and celebrates or scorns your ethical decisions, but for the revealing aspects of the process. Yes, it is impossible to preserve and save everyone by the end of the game, but you can at least try, or not at all. The unseen protagonist of Darkest Dungeon can resist becoming a heartless tyrant, but it is up to you to pay the price and try. And this is how the Affliction System tells the player's story, independent from the plot of the game. It keeps the protagonist unseen and forces you, the player, to make the moral decisions and face the consequences. Now, what's the takeaway for you as someone who just wants to understand, analyze, or review games, or as someone who's making a game and wants to make the narrative more engaging? In either case, you just want to shift your attention from the game to the player. So for developers, you don't have to do exactly what Darkest Dungeon does, but you can take the essence, the structure, and apply it to other games. For example, let's say you want to bring morality into your game's narrative. It might be a good idea to put systems and mechanics in place that push players towards tough decisions and make kinder, more ethical decisions technically possible, but mechanically undesirable. Then it can leave the rest to the player. That is, instead of making decisions for players, judging those decisions and writing dialogue that reflects on that judgment. Ideally, you don't want your game to speak for the player, you want to enable the player to speak through your game. Trust your players, they're smart enough to get your point on their own. And for reviewers, analysts, and players alike, if you want to catch these moments in games, pay attention to what the player is doing while the game is happening. Shift your attention from what the game makes you feel or think to what your input into the game is. Darkest Dungeon's exploration of morality is not scripted in the least. It is activated and directed by the player. The game just enables it by providing the right mechanics, so look for similar relationships between the player and the game. We are going to go through many more and different examples in future videos, so please subscribe and catch those videos when they drop. Also, head over to twitch.tv/GameNarrative101 where you will catch me playing games that I'm studying and working on videos. Let me know what you thought of this video by using the like and dislike button and the comment section. I have never made any videos before, so things could definitely be better. So I appreciate any genuine feedback. Also, I gotta thank Mark Brown of GameMaker's Toolkit for being by far the biggest inspiration and role model for me here on YouTube. His stuff is amazing. I cited 5 of his YouTube videos in my MA thesis, so definitely check him out if you haven't. I know you'll never see this, but thank you, Mark. And to all of you, I hope to see you here again, and until I do, take care of yourselves, stay healthy and happy. Goodbye.